Alright, so this is a little bit of a review question just to start things out and ask you to state the equation factored in standard form. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look over here at my roots, and I can see I've got my roots. So I'll just write those down for a second just to get myself started. And I know my roots are at -2 comma 0 and at 6 comma 0. So the next thing I know is the factor form would then be y equals a x plus 2 x minus 6, because you flip the sign when you put it into factored form. So the next thing we would do is we need to figure out a. And to figure out a, you're going to need to use any known point. So you could use the the y-intercept, or you could use the vertex. And I think, going with the y-intercept is nice and easy. So you know that the y value is 24. You do not know a. You know the x value is 0. The other x value is still 0. Just made a little mistake there. Minus 6. So it's a 0 plus 2 would still be 2. And then 0 minus 6 is -6. And then I would multiply 2 and -6 together. And this is a common mistake that students will do, so they'll write it like this, and I'll say it's -12. And just be careful, because sometimes they misthink that the operation being done between a and 12 is subtracting, but don't forget that before it was multiplying, and it still is multiplying, so you need to make sure you write that with brackets. Now I need to get rid of my -12, so I divide by -12, I divide by sorry, I'm just going to move it over a bit, divide by -12, that gave me a bit of room. And so my answer now, these cancel out, is -2. So my a value is -2, and I can write my final answer of y equals -2 x plus 2 x minus 6 is the factored form. So the next thing I need to do is I need to find standard form. So I know that I'm going to kind of draw myself a little boundary to kind of rope myself off a little bit of space here. So there's the first part of this question. The second part of this question, I know that y equals -2 x plus 2 x minus 6, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this, okay? So I'm going to just go y equals, and I'll leave the -2 for the end because that's the way I like to do it. And I know that I have to FOIL it. So I'm going to go, what's x times x? I get x squared. And what's x times -6? That's -6x. And what's 2 times x? That's positive 2x. Sorry, that doesn't look like a 2. And what's positive 2 times -6? And that's -12. So next, I know -2, and now I need to simplify. So x squared, and what's -6 plus 2? And I'm pretty sure it's -4x minus 12. And now I need to expand and use the distributive property and multiply that in all into there. So I do that to get -2x squared plus 8x plus 24 is standard form. And you can even check your answer. I know that positive 24, the c value, is my y-intercept, and I know that positive 24 is my y-intercept. So in this example, I'm asking you to find the value of a. And in the past, we would have always looked to see where the parabola crosses the x-axis. And in this situation, the parabola does not cross the x-axis, so we cannot use factored form. So it becomes kind of tricky when you're kind of stuck in this situation. And that means we're going to have to use other tools. So what I'm going to say is, with no roots, yikes, my pen's kind of acting up. With no roots, that's better. we need math for replace batteries. Another strategy. And that strategy can be algebra, okay, bud.
My hair's not even wet.
Awesome. Or using a graph. So to start, instead of starting out with a real tough one like the one I just showed you, I thought it'd be a little bit easier to kind of start with something simple. So this graph right here is going to represent our standard, and what we'll end up calling this is our parent function in coming days, but we'll call that y equals x squared. And this one right here is our unknown. So this was y equals ax squared. And really we need to determine this a value or kind of figure that out. So what we're going to do is we're going to use two different strategies. I'm not going to say step pattern, but let's just change this to determine the value of a. And we can do that two ways. I'll kind of show you both and I'll kind of weigh in with my own opinions after. So we can go with graphically or algebraically. So graphically what we would do is we'd first look at our step pattern for y equals x squared. And we'd figure out the step pattern. So to do that, what you do is you start at the vertex. There's my vertex right there. And you figure out, okay, so to that next point, what's our pattern? So there's one point. And there's our next point. And there's our next point. So to get from the origin to there, from the vertex to the first point, that was one step up. And then to our next point, it's 3 steps up. And to our next point, it's 5 steps up. And the pattern ends up being a 1, 3, 5 pattern. And that will always be the step pattern for y equals x squared. So then what we need to ask ourselves is, well, for the second parabola, if we started at the origin, what's our step pattern? So there's our origin, and our next point, it looks like about there. And geez, it looks like it's about, it looks to me like it's about here. I'm just going to double check that. Sorry, I'm not going to say it's there. And the one problem is, as you just noticed, it's going to take some reading of the graph, and you're going to have to read really carefully. And the next one is about there. So there's the 3 points that I'm going to use. How I'm picking those is it's at 1, 2, and 3. I'm picking those 2 points. So just to help you out with how am I coming up with that magic, what I'm doing is I'm looking on the graph and figuring out the steps each time. So what I'm going to do this time is I know from the origin or from the vertex to the first point was 3, and up to the next one was 9, and up to the next one was 15. So next thing I do is I write for y equals ax squared. My step pattern was 3, 9, and 15. So in my head what I need to ask myself is, how did I go from a 1, 3, 5 pattern to a 3, 9, 15 pattern? And I know that I multiplied by 2. Oops, I didn't multiply by 2, I multiplied by 3. What was I thinking there? And I multiplied by positive 3 to get that pattern. So therefore, a equals 3. So that's one way to do it. Then there's the algebra method. So the first thing you do is you start with the vertex form of the quadratic equation, because the parabola doesn't cross the zeros or across the x-axis, or it has no zeros. You're going to have to use something else, and that something else is vertex form. And that looks good to me. And because our vertex is on the origin, we can then simplify this to y equals a x minus 0 squared plus 0. And then we know y equals a x squared. So now we pick any known point. And I'm going to pick a nice easy one. I'll look over here. And let's go with, when we've got it right here, we've got the point, or known point, of 1, comma 3. So that's a known point. So let's substitute that in now. That's 3a 1 squared. So what's 1 squared? And that's just 1. And if you really want, you can divide by 1 on both sides, but it really doesn't change too much. And a equals 3. So now you have a, and you can even plug that in now. And you know that y equals 3. I'm just going to plug it into this form right here because our zeros are, our vertex is at 0, 0. Is at 3x squared. And I'll provide the same advice I did to everybody else in the class. So the graphical method is okay, and it works okay for right now in grade 10, but it will fall apart for you, and it does involve a little bit of fine reading, and as your probably gets more and more stretched, it gets harder and harder to discern the exact points, and this pattern will become less useful for you. The algebra method I would highly recommend you become very, very comfortable with and you find yourself using, because it will hold up and still be a very good use for you beyond the class as well. In grade 11 is what I mean by beyond. Alright, so to graph this one example, you're going to have to develop yourself a table of values. So I would then, or first start off with your parent function. So your parent function, just to remember, is y equals x squared. So your parent function, start with negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. And then your y values, well, what's negative 3 squared? It's 9. Negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 1 squared is 1. 0 squared is 0. 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. And 3 squared is 9. So there's a nice little start. And you should do this enough that this kind of becomes something that you can kind of quickly jot down really fast. Then we got x, y. And so that was for your parent function over there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do this for our question, which is y equals 1/2 x squared. So I'm going to just reuse my same points from before. So then I'm going to do the math, and I'm going to think to myself, okay, so I'm going to do, sorry about that, it's going to be 1/2 times negative 3 squared. So in my head I think what's negative 3 squared is 9, and 9 times 1/2 equals 4.5. And then I'm going to repeat this, so I'm going to take 1/2, sorry about that, multiply it by negative 2 squared, and so negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 1/2 equals 2. I'll repeat again, so what's 1/2 times 1 squared? So 1 squared is 1, times 1/2 is 0.5. And what's, for this one should be pretty easy. What is 1/2 times 0 squared? And that's going to be 0. And now I'm going to repeat some of the steps, and you know what's 1/2 times 1 squared is 0.5. And this is the moment you see it start to repeat, so you know that's 2. That's 4.5. So then you take a minute and you can graph your points, and what you should end up getting is a nice parabola that you're able to draw very easily from your ordered pairs. So your two pairs would be, or sorry, your points would be negative 3, 4.5, negative 2, 2, negative 1, 0.5. There's your vertex at 0, 0, 1, 0.5, 2, comma 2, and 3, comma 4.5. And that would be how you would graph that one. The pen's not as accurate as you think it is that I'm using, so it will be a little tricky for me to do it nice and neat and tidily, but I hope that you overall get the idea.